Hello and welcome to this place in the middle of the forest in Oslo, Norway. Outside it is snow and it's very dark because it's 8 o'clock in the evening in Norway, and the whole production team in this performance are sitting in different time zones in different countries, and I guess you as a listener also are sitting in different countries. We are soon ready to start. This is direct, it's live, and anything can happen. If your browser is stuck or something, just refresh it and hopefully you are back in the story. And as I said, everything can happen, and don't worry, just be patient and we will be back. To add a bit time confusion to this, you are around 30 seconds delayed from us being here, so now is now in 30 seconds for you. Anyway, Kristin and I, who is going to perform this, we are looking forward to meeting you through this weird world and in this mythical world we are entering. So just, well, let's start, I think. I remember, and so do you. Lyden av metall, avtrykket av en hånd, lukten av den som forlot. I remember, but I am afraid. Odin, one-eyed god, bear, cloak covering half his face, stick in his hand. Odin, the one-eyed god, had 2 ravens. Every day they flew out into the world. Odin said, I am afraid. I'm afraid that hugin, meaning thought, will not come back to me. But I'm even more afraid that munin, meaning memory, will never return. And what was Odin afraid of? Was he afraid of forgetting the first war? When the world was settled, was he afraid of forgetting the first 2 human beings called Ask and Embla? Was he afraid of forgetting his dead son? I am afraid of forgetting my dads. Vår. Vår means spring. An hour. Hervor is the name of a woman, meaning our battle, our fight, our strife. Every day, our strife, our fight, our battle. I remember, and so do you. The tree we climbed as children, and from top of the tree I could see all over the world. Well, it was just an island, but to me it was all over the world. I remember the tree keeping the world together, the tree called Yggdrasil, by one of its roots. 3 women were sitting, 3 giants, 3 norner. The 3 women were sitting there spinning threads for each life, sometimes cutting it. One of the women, she was called Urd, meaning, what do you bring from the past? The other one was called Værande, meaning, how do you grasp the moment of now? Well, for you, 30 seconds later. And the third, she was called Skuld. What do you owe the future? Past, future is just 2 variations of now. Now you and I and us are together. And we try to I remember. Head teacher Romeloff. I prefer to call him Rektor. Rektor Romeloff. Rektor Romeloff, he was a big man. He had long black hair, he had long black beard, he had big hands, and he ate egg with salt at lunch. Every Friday, all the children at the school had to go into this middle room at the school, and we had to sit down on carpeted floors. In the middle of the room, there was a kind of a stage where Rektor Romeloff had his one-man show. Rektor Romeloff, he stepped on to the stage, and then he opened his mouth so we could see the egg bathed in salt down there in his belly. And then his tongue went out and in, up and down, here and there, because Rektor Romeloff, he was telling not any kind of stories, no. He was telling king sagas, stories about the king that had lived in Norway, all way back from when Odin came wandering from Asia, settled down in the Nordic countries and became a god, and so on. Rektor Romeloff, he paid particular attention to death, because death would say something about how you would be remembered. Me, I remember that I were interested in more this strange death, like for instance King Fjolne, who stumbled and drowned in the tub of mead, or King Domalde, who one night was strangled by a creature called Mara, or King Aun, who did not want to die like his ancestors. So he bloated, he sacrificed his sons to Odin, and for each son he killed, his own life was 10 years longer. And finally he was so old that they had to feed him with a horn. Still, King Aun had one more son he wanted to sacrifice, but he never managed, because he died of Aunsott, old age. And then you had the kings who had to sit down on their knees, and someone would come up behind them to give the king an eagle on their back. So the skin on the back was removed, and the ribs were crushed, and the lungs were grabbed and placed on the back of the king. These stories I heard every Friday for 9 school years. Not one time did I hear about a woman and how she died. And Hervor, the woman, is a story we're going to tell you, a story we never heard. Year 524 after Christ, in a country we today call Russia, there was a Norseman living, among them an earl called Bjartmar Earl. He was powerful. He had a farm. He had a long house with a hall. In the hall, benches covered with skins, a long table, a high seat. In the high seat, the earl sitting with a wrinkle in his forehead, a cup of beer in his hand, a drop of sweat hanging from his nose. In a room leading into the hall, 4 women were. 3 of the women were elderly, their backs bent, their faces wrinkled, having spindles in their hands as they walked around like slowly growing roots. And as they were whispering, talking to the 4th woman, the 4th woman was young, the daughter of the earl. She was lying on the floor. Her belly was full. Her legs were spread because inside her there was someone who did not want to enter this world of clickbaits and comments. But she was pushed out, screaming. The 3 women, they looked at the child. The mother, she wanted to take a child, but the 3 women stopped her. They cut the string between the daughter and the mother. Your first scar that you do not remember. Your navel, once you were connected to the ancestor, then it was cut and you were free. Now the child was lying there, kicking its feet, waving its arms, crying a crispy cry. And the 3 old women looked at the child and they said, "She has a giant's anger. Place her in the forest. Let the animals of the forest devour her. She will never behave like a woman. Let the rain of the forest drown her. She will never spin. Let the heat of the forest eat her. She will never find a husband. Let the soil of the forest cover her. She will never give birth to a son. Let Hel hold her. Let Hel hold her. Let Hel hold her. Let Hel
Hel
hold
was half dead, half alive, ruling the land of no visits, the kingdom of death.
Let death hold her. Death, half alive, half death. Hel, let Hel, no! Said the mother, and she picked up the child. I will hold her. I will protect her, and she will never know the curse of the family. She will never know. She will never know. She will never know. And this is how Hervor was born. The mother is now out of the story. She has done her narrative duty. And Hervor, well, I guess it went partly as the three women said. I mean, she grew, but she was more outside than inside. She did not sit down to spin or weave or knit like I have been knitting this dress. No, she was out climbing the trees, looking all over. From the top of the trees, she was playing with swords, she was riding a horse, she was using axe, fighting with that. And most of the time, she was alone. Yes, because she was a problem. I mean, what was she? She was half this and half that. Categorisering, sorting. Who are you really? Where do you really come from? Sometimes she had to go inside and sit at Ting, and Ting was a kind of a democratic meeting at that time. And there she sat together with elderly men with beard and listened to them discussing, talking, solving problems, and quite often she was the problem they had to solve. Once, for instance, she had killed a man, but her grandfather, the Earl, protected her every time. One day, she was out walking in the wood. A group of enslaved people came towards her and surrounded her. But she was strong. Her feet had grown, her legs were strong, her back was broad, her arms were strong. But the enslaved people, they pushed her and they pinched her, and she pushed and pinched back, and one of them, he went down on the ground. He jumped up and he said, "Hvem er det du tror du er da? Hæ? Tror du at du er noe verdt noe, eller? Du tror du er bedre enn oss? Tror du virkelig det? Who do you think you are? We know who you are. You who are a daughter of a whore. A daughter, not a son, a daughter of a whore. And not only that, your mother slept with a slave. You're a daughter of a whore and a slave." Who am I? I, who grew up without a father. My very first memory, I am sitting in a kitchen. The colors of the walls is turquoise. I don't know the English word for that. I guess it's a mixture of green and blue. I'm sitting in a drawer. I guess I pretend it is a boat, because I think we've just been to the island where I later moved to and been in a boat. But right now, I'm sitting there, holding my ears, closing my eyes, surrounding myself with darkness. Still, through the darkness, I can hear him. I can hear him hit her. We escaped. Memory. Memory that forms us, our identity. The thing with memory is that memory does not separate between facts and fiction. So your identity might actually be also have parts which is fiction. Yes, you might have been told something so vividly that you think it actually happened. Deep in. For instance, how do you react? How does your body react when you see a snake? That is our biological memory. Deep in us, memories from far behind, from the time we were hunting, from the time when we tried to avoid being food for others, from the time when we had to remember our flock. And this helped create our brains. We remember more than what we are aware of. Our body, for instance, our body has this confident relationship with the surroundings because of distilled memories, habits that now are a gold mine for others. For instance, you open the window, you browse, you click, you love, you like, you comment, and then you close the window and you leave your habits out there, a gold mine for others. And next time you open the window, the world is so much more streamed for you. We do not have to remember anymore. We have devices that help us remember. We have maps in our pockets, and our flock is now gathered by others, and we do not have to even remember the birthdays of our flock. I wonder if memory is important for our identity, and if memory helps us with our brains. What happens to us if we do not have to remember anymore? Who am I? Hervor, she was standing in front of her grandfather, sitting on the high seat. In the high seat, the grandfather with even a deeper wrinkle in his head than before. Still a cup of beer. Tell me, who am I? I mean, how can I know my path if I do not know where I come from? Hervor said. And the Earl, he leaned forward and a drop of sweat fell down on the floor. He sighed and said, I am soon taking the road to hell, land of death, and I'm not leaving any stories untold. And then he told her the following.
In the beginning, it must have been in the spring, Then a god descended among the people. The god, he came to this old, poor couple. They invited him in, and he spent the night there, and that night he lay with the older wife. The next day he went on. In time, the older wife got pregnant, and she had a son, this son being the ancestors of all slaves. But slaves, they don't create stories. They just listen to the stories of others. The god went on, and he came to this hard-working couple. They invited him in, and he spent the night there, and he slept with the wife, and the wife got pregnant, and she had a son. And this son was the ancestors of all farmers. But farmers, they don't create stories. They just retell what they hear. Then the god came to this young, strong, married couple, and they invited him in, and he spent the night. In the beginning, it must have been in the spring when the world was new. Then a god descended among the people. The god, he came to this old, poor couple. They invited him in, and he spent the night there, and that night he lay with the older wife. And the next day he went on. In time, the wife got pregnant, and she had a son. This son being the ancestors of all slaves. Slaves, they don't create stories. They just listen to the stories of others. The god went on, and he came to this hard-working couple. They let him in, and he spent the night there, and he slept with the wife. In time, the wife got pregnant, and she had a son. This son being the ancestors of all farmers. But farmers, they don't create stories. They just retell what they hear. Then the god came to this young, strong, married couple. they let him in, and he spent the night there, and he slept with the wife, and the wife got pregnant, and she had a son. And this son, he was the ancestors of all kings. And kings, they create stories.
King creates stories. That was what they believed. Because kings would make this great future. Other stories were just dysfunctional elements in this bright future. Once upon a time there was a king. He was in the spring. He wanted to go hunting. But you already know that story because you listened to a prologue. So I'm not going to tell you the story, just remind you about the sword. The sword called Tyrfing, which both was carrying curse and blessing. And the warrior who had the sword decided that his son would not inherit the curse of this sword. So when the warrior died, he was buried in an unknown place with a sword next to him, so his son would not find the sword. He never had a son. He had a daughter. You, Hervor, is his daughter. And I beg you, my child, do not follow the hunger for the sword. Find a home, leave it alone. Find a man, a husband, have a family. But do not create. But as soon as Hervor heard this word, of course she walked out of the long house. She walked into the house of weapons. She grabbed a sword, she grabbed a shield. She walked into the house of animal. She grabbed a horse. She sat on the horse and she rode away. And she did not look back. And she who left as a child would return as a warrior. And she rode, and she rode, and she rode, and she rode, and she did not look back. And she rode, and she rode, and she rode, and she did. But then she heard sounds, and she turned, and there she saw this big cloud of dust. Out of the dust, galloping horses. On the horses, warriors who had scars they could tell about, because you do not tell about the wounds. And the whole group of warriors surrounded Hervor, and the leader of the warriors, he looked at Hervor and he said, "What's your name, young man?" Hervor, Hervor said. "Do you like fighting, young man?" "I love fighting," Hervor said. "So come with us, be a warrior. Fight with us and you will be rich. Fight for a king and you will be famous. Fight for several kings and you will have your name in the future." And Hervor, of course, she followed the warriors. She rode with the warriors. She sailed with the warriors. She ate with the warriors. She slept in the boat with the warriors. She would stand in front of the boat feeling the water splashing in her face. And when she entered land, she would stand in front of the warriors feeling the blood. Oh, what a war it was. War. War. The war, our war, war. War, the war between vaner and eser, habits and hates, giants and gods. The war between Athenians, Persians, Romans, barbarians, Englishmen, Norsemen, Danes, Swedes, Norwegians, Catholic, Protestants. The war between the legs, they and us, we and you, them. The war in the comment section, with or without affection, the blow under the belt. Polarization, argumentation, barbarization, everyday rationalization, the war between the legs, abuse, accuse, overuse. The war is written in scar, scratched, patched, detached, heterosexual, commercial, multifunctional. You believe it's fictional, weapon, aggression, depression, all the hate we create, bloody and poetic lines in the battlefield between the legs, mothers, sisters, reconciliation, fair, peace, really, yes, ideally. Between the legs, the brutality of the war between the legs gives birth to the victims of the war. Peace, really, yes, you know, ideally. War, the war. Her breasts were like two overfilled plastic bags, like when you've been to the grocery, and her belly was like an ocean with waves. I know this because I saw her naked. One early morning, I was on the island where I grew up. I was in the second floor. It was early in the morning, as I said, and suddenly I heard a voice going, "Ooh!" And curious as I was, I stepped up to the window. I looked down, and down there, on the green grass, in front of the kitchen window, where we soon would eat our breakfast, she was standing, completely naked, washing herself in water from the rain, because it was so good for her skin and hair. I immediately stepped back and thought to myself, why is she putting us through this? And the reason for me thinking this was because she, down there, was my grandmother. My grandmother was big. My grandmother liked to swim in the sea, in the ocean, as early as in April when the ice just had left. My grandmother liked to lie on the beach and sunbathe herself. My grandmother was born in a time when women did not get any education, at least not her family. And as soon as she was old enough, she was pushed out of the house and told to find herself a husband. So she traveled to the island, and there she met my grandfather, 15 years older than her. But my grandmother, she was born with this huge romantic gene. It's just that she was married to my grandfather, who was a farmer / blacksmith / lighthouse keeper / butcher. She did not get any breakfast in bed early in the morning. She did not get any flowers now and then. So my grandmother, she had to live out her idea of romance through other things, like the TV series Dallas, and of course romance novels. And there was one structure that she considered as a good story, the only story, and the story had to be about a woman. The woman had to come from poor circumstances with a lot of obstacles in front of her, especially concerning love. Yes, either the man she loved did not notice her, or his family prevented him from seeing her. But of course the woman won at the end, and she became a queen of cooperation firm or something like that, with an adopted child from every corner of the world, with yoga in the morning and knitting socks in the evening. Of course, my grandmother, she is long gone. But every time I go to the island, it is as she is sitting there in the garden, leaning up against the trunk of a tree. By the roots of the tree, there she is sitting. And there she's sitting knitting dresses with a novel on her lap and a pen by her side. Because when she was reading, she would find scenes or structures that she did not agree on, and then she would take the pen and she would cross it out, and then she would give me the book. And when I opened the book and read, there were missing pieces, and I had to use my imagination to cover up for the missing pieces in the story. Hervor loved to fight. When the leader of the army died, Hervor became the new leader. And she traveled with the warriors from place to place to place. And every new place she asked about the sword, where it was, and every time she asked, they said, well, it's a rumor, it's a lie. It doesn't exist a sword that will curse and bless you to win a war. It's a myth, it's a fairy tale, it's a folk tale. One day, as Hervor was walking down towards the ship with her men, an elderly man came walking with a stick in his hand, a long beard, a cloak covering half his face. He stopped her and he said, "Your father is buried on an island. Your father is buried on an island in Denmark. Your father is buried on the island called Samsø." And then he disappeared. And of course, Hervor immediately traveled to that island in Denmark. There she jumped on land, but her men, they stayed on the ship because they had heard rumors about this island. Rumors about strange things happening there. And the warriors, of course, they were not afraid of the enemy in a war, but they were afraid of things they didn't know about. And Hervor, she said, "Okay, you can remain here. Wait for me until sunrise. If I'm not back, leave." And then she walked along the coast of the island to see if there were others there. And then she saw a small boat and she looked around, and there on top of a hill she saw an old shepherd coming running with a stick in his hand and 3 or 4 sheep. And the old shepherd, he called to her, "Young man, you have to leave the island now. The night is coming. Leave the island." And the shepherd, he ran up to her and said, "Young man, come with me in the boat. You see, on the island, haven't you heard it? On the island there is a woman who turned men into pigs. And then she roast them first, and then on this island there's a giant with one eye, and around the island there are mermaids that lure you into the ocean. So come with me into the boat." Hervor said, "I take my chance on staying." But she helped the elderly man into the boat with his sheep, and she pushed the boat. And the man, he rowed away. And Hervor, she stood there until he disappeared in the horizon. And then she turned. And as I turned, there he was. I was 19 years old. I was living in Paris. I was studying in Paris, and the school was far away from where I lived. So I had to get up early in the morning to get in time to school. And this was this kind of morning. I was early up. And I had a yellow Walkman. So I put the Walkman into my pocket and I put on the headphones to listen to Aha and Take On Me. But the battery was flat. Anyway, I kept on the headphones, pretending I was listening to Aha. I walked out into the streets of Paris. The streets were quite empty. I didn't see anyone. And I was walking there, pretending, listening to Aha. As I got closer to the metro, the underground, the subway, I saw a figure, huge figure, leaning up against a rail with dirty cloth. I pretended I did not see him. I pretended I was listening, so I passed him. But he saw me. And he talked to me. But of course I could not hear him because I was listening to Aha. So I walked on. And he turned his huge body and followed me. I walked faster. And so did he. Down on the metro, I took the ticket into this little opening and the doors went open. I walked through, the doors closed. I walked down on the metro. He jumped over the doors. There, down, there, he, closer. I could sense him, I could smell him, I could feel him, I could feel the touch of his hand, the wind of his hand trying to reach for me, but I walked on. And when I turned, I could see straight into his eyes, so I turned back and I walked on down to the platform. There was no one there to see, except this yellow light coming out of the train, standing there waiting for departure time. But there was no one inside the train, so I walked on and he walked on and I walked and I walked and I... A woman appeared. I do not know from where. The woman, she threw out her arms and threw them around me as if I was a daughter she had not seen for a while. And then she led me into the train. We sat down opposite each other. The doors closed. The train left. He standing on the platform. And all my French was poor. I do not know her name, but I will always remember, and so will you. As Hervor turned, there was a fog there, mist so thick. She had to push her body through the mist. She didn't know where to go, so she walked on until she saw some light, as if the sun had fallen down to take a rest for the night and threw a beam up onto the sky. She followed the light and she came to this hill covered in grass, blue light coming out. Here he was her father. Oh, Father, oh, my father died alone in his apartment. Oh, Father, wake up. I, your only daughter, standing here in front of your grave, your only child, wake up, oh Father, wake up. You who are lying there under the roots of the tree, I beg you, wake up. Give me the sword so I can be part of the future, so I can be part of the story, so I will not be forgotten. Oh Father, you forgot me when you died alone in your apartment. Oh Father, wake up! Out of the grave came a huge giant, surrounded by frost and fire. Oh, daughter, you woke me up, but there is no comfort in you waking me up. Oh, daughter, leave this cursed place. Hurry back to the ships before it's too late. Oh, Father, I am your only child. Give me the sword. It is my right. My father, he chose loneliness. He chose death. Oh, daughter, leave this place. You will not need a sword. You're a woman. You don't need this, Father. It is my right, and I am not afraid of the fire and frost surrounding you. Give me the sword.
Hervor, min dotter, sig du mig sannhet, du iler i møte, du
Daughter, you are not going to breed fair. You will have one son who will become a powerful king. But I am powerful because I know that I can balance life and death like any other human. And those who cannot balance life or death, life and death, well, they are not remembered, Father. It is my right to choose between life and death.
Father,
And the giant disappeared back into the hill, and at the same time a sword stood out. And Hervor, she walked up towards the sword, she grabbed it like Arthur, like Sigurd, she grabbed the sword and wrapped it in a cloth. And then she ran back to the ships, but the ships were gone. Yes, the men had been so scared by the light and the fog and the mist that they had sailed their way, but Hervor, she managed to get off the island, and she walked through Denmark, and she traveled through Sweden into Norway, and every time she met someone, she told about the sword Tyrfing, the story of the sword, and the story spread far and wide, even up to our contemporary time, when a man found the story and created his own story based on that story, the Lord of Rings. Hervor, she continued to travel through Norway, all the way up to north of Norway, Finnmark. Gudmund was an old king. Some say that he was over 100 years old. He had a son called Høfn. Høfn was beautiful, was wise, and some even say that Gudmund and Høfn was like Odin and Balder. This moment, Gudmund, he was sitting, the old king was sitting in his hall with all the warriors gathered around him and his son by his side. And the old king, he was sitting there playing a game called Nefatafel. It's a game close to chess, except there's only one king. Well, the game was going bad for the old king. So the old king, he looked at his son to get some advice. But his son, Høfn, he looked into the corner of the hall where the young warrior was standing, the young warrior who had arrived a couple of days before. And Høfn could not believe the stories he had heard about this young warrior had made him so big, but here he was standing like and so soft. Soft hands, soft hips, soft chin. Høfn blushed. The old king looked at the young warrior, and the old king knew that the warrior had traveled a lot and seen a lot, so the old king nodded to the young warrior, and the young warrior took the sword and placed it on a bench, and the young warrior came up to the old king, and the young warrior looked at the game, and the young warrior whispered to the king, and the king made a move, and now his game was going much better. One of the warriors in the hall saw the sword on the bench, wrapped in cloth. And it was as if it was calling, singing to him. So he walked up to the sword. He took the handle of the sword, and then he pulled the sword out of his cloth. And then he raised the sword, and the sword was singing in the hall, and all the men looked at the sword, and all the men wanted to own the sword, but Hervor, she was there, she grabbed the sword, she pushed the sword into the man. And the man was dead. And Hervor, she wrapped the sword in the cloth and left the hall. The man wanted to follow to take revenge, but the old king, King Gudmund, he said, "You're so bloodthirsty and you're blind. Can't you see that that is a woman? And if you follow her, you will have no future." And Hervor, well, she left Finnmark and then she went Viking, following the tracks of her father. But we have no knowledge of that, and no stories collected of her travels. But she went back home. Maybe she was tired of traveling. She went back to the place where she once was born. She placed the horse in the house of animals, and she took the shield into the house of weapons, and then she walked into the hall and undressed and put on a dress, and then she sat down to spin and weave and knit. And now the rumors about this beautiful woman spread far and wide, and they came from far and wide to propose to her. And one day, as she was sitting in the hall, the doors went open and in he came. Hervor from Finnmark. He proposed to her, and she said yes. And the two of them moved to Norway, moved to Finnmark, and they took over the kingdom after the old king, King Gudmund. And she did not have one son, but 2 sons. But she loved only one. And she gave him the sword. And he killed his brother. Half death, half alive. We do not know how Hervor died. We know she died because her husband, Hervor, was so filled with grief that he killed himself in an apartment completely alone. Maybe she died of old age, or maybe she died of sickness. There is a gap here that I use my imagination to fill out. And I think she died in the battlefield as she had lived. And Odin, he sent one of his Valkyrie warrior women down to get her. And then Hervor, she went to this big hall where you could fight all day and you could drink in the evening and tell about your scars, because you do not tell about your wounds. King Heidrek was a powerful king. He had only one child, and he begged the one-eyed Odin to bless his child. And he gave the child the name after his mother. He gave his daughter the name after her. Her name was Hervor. Hervor, shield maid.